Chapter 19 of the Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Chapter 19. Descriptive of a dinner at Mr. Ralph Nickleby's, and of the manner in which the company entertained themselves before dinner, at dinner, and after dinner. The bile and rancour of the worthy Miss Nagg undergoing no diminution during the remainder of the week, but rather augmenting with every successive hour, and the honest ire of all the young ladies rising or seeming to rise in exact proportion to the good spinster's indignation, and both waxing very hot every time Miss Nickleby was called upstairs, it will be readily imagined that that young lady's daily life was none of the most cheerful or enviable kind. She hailed the arrival of Saturday night as a prisoner would a few delicious hours' respite from slow and wearing torture, and felt that the poor pittance for her first week's labour would have been dearly and hardly earned had its amount been trebled. When she joined her mother as usual at the street corner, she was not a little surprised to find her in conversation with Mr. Ralph Nickleby. But her surprise was soon redoubled, no less by the matter of their conversation than by the smoothed and altered manner of Mr. Nickleby himself. "Ah, my dear," said Ralph, "we were at that moment talking about you." "Indeed?" replied Kate, shrinking, though she scarce knew why, from her uncle's cold glistening eye. "That instant," said Ralph. "I was coming to call for you, making sure to catch you before you left, but your mother and I have been talking over family affairs, and the time has slipped away so rapidly." "Well now, hasn't it?" interposed Mrs. Nickleby, quite insensible to the sarcastic tone of Ralph's last remark. "Upon my word, I couldn't have believed it possible that such a Kate, my dear, you're to dine with your uncle at 6:30 to-morrow." Triumphing in having been the first to communicate this extraordinary intelligence, Mrs. Nickleby nodded and smiled a great many times to impress its full magnificence on Kate's wondering mind, and then flew off at an acute angle to a committee of ways and means. "Let me see," said the good lady. "Your black silk frock would be quite dress enough, my dear, with that pretty little scarf and a plain band in your hair and a pair of black silk Oh, dear, dear!" cried Mrs. Nickleby, flying off at another angle. "If I had but those unfortunate amethysts of mine! You recollect them, Kate, my love, how they used to sparkle, you know. But your papa, your poor dear papa, ah, there never was anything so cruelly sacrificed as those jewels were. Never." Overpowered by this agonizing thought, Mrs. Nickleby shook her head in a melancholy manner and applied her handkerchief to her eyes. "I don't want them, mamma, indeed," said Kate. "Forget that you ever had them." "Lord, Kate, my dear," rejoined Mrs. Nickleby pettishly, "how like a child you talk! 24 silver teaspoons, brother-in-law, 2 gravies, 4 salts, all the amethysts, necklace, brooch, and earrings, all made away with at the same time, and I saying almost on my bended knees to that poor good soul, 'Why don't you do something, Nicholas? Why don't you make some arrangement?' I am sure that anybody who was about us at that time will do me the justice to own that if I said that once, I said it 50 times a day. Didn't I, Kate, my dear? Did I ever lose an opportunity of impressing it on your poor papa?" "No, no, mamma, never," replied Kate. And to do Mrs. Nickleby justice, she never had lost, and to do married ladies as a body justice, they seldom do lose, any occasion of inculcating similar golden percepts, whose only blemish is the slight degree of vagueness and uncertainty in which they are usually enveloped. "Ah!" said Mrs. Nickleby with great fervour, "if my advice had been taken at the beginning! Well, I have always done my duty, and that's some comfort." When she had arrived at this reflection, Mrs. Nickleby sighed, rubbed her hands, cast up her eyes, and finally assumed a look of meek composure, thus importing that she was a persecuted saint, but that she wouldn't trouble her hearers by mentioning a circumstance which must be so obvious to everybody. "Now," said Ralph with a smile, which, in common with all other tokens of emotion, seemed to skulk under his face rather than play boldly over it, "to return to the point from which we have strayed, I have a little party of gentlemen with whom I am connected in business just now, at my house to-morrow, and your mother has promised that you shall keep house for me. I am not much used to parties, but this is one of business, and such fooleries are an important part of it sometimes. You don't mind obliging me?"
"Mind?" cried Mrs. Nickleby. "My dear Kate, why—"
"Pray," interrupted Ralph, motioning her to be silent, "I spoke to my niece."
"I shall be very glad, of course, uncle," replied Kate, "but I am afraid you will find me awkward and embarrassed."
"Oh, no," said Ralph. "Come when you like, in a hackney coach. I'll pay for it. Good night. God bless you." The blessing seemed to stick in Mr. Ralph Nickleby's throat, as if it were not used to the thoroughfare and didn't know the way out. But it got out somehow, though awkwardly enough, and having disposed of it, he shook hands with his two relatives and abruptly left them.
"What a very strongly marked countenance your uncle has!" said Mrs. Nickleby, quite struck with his parting look. "I don't see the slightest resemblance to his poor brother."
"Mamma,"
said Kate reprovingly, "to think of such a thing!" "No," said Mrs. Nickleby, musing, "there certainly is none, but it's a very honest face." The worthy matron made this remark with great emphasis and elocution, as if it comprised no small quantity of ingenuity and research, and in truth it was not unworthy of being classed among the extraordinary discoveries of the age. Kate looked up hastily, and as hastily looked down again. "What has come over you, my dear, in the name of goodness?"
asked Mrs. Nickleby when they had walked on for some time in silence.
"I was only thinking, mamma," answered Kate. "Thinking?" repeated Mrs. Nickleby. "Aye, and indeed plenty to think about too. Your uncle has taken a strong fancy to you, that's quite clear, and if some extraordinary good fortune doesn't come to you after this, I shall be a little surprised, that's all."
With this she launched out into sundry anecdotes of young ladies who had had £1,000 notes given them in reticules by eccentric uncles, and of young ladies who had accidentally met amiable gentlemen of enormous wealth at their uncles' houses and married them after short but ardent courtships. And Kate, listening first in apathy and afterwards in amusement, felt, as they walked home, something of her mother's sanguine complexion gradually awakening in her own bosom, and began to think that her prospects might be brightening and that better days might be dawning upon them. Such is hope, heaven's own gift to struggling mortals, pervading like some subtle essence from the skies all things, both good and bad, as universal as death and more infectious than disease. The feeble winter's sun, and winter's suns in the city are very feeble indeed, might have brightened up as he shone through the dim windows of the large old house on witnessing the unusual sight which one half-furnished room displayed. In a gloomy corner, where for years had stood a silent dusty pile of merchandise sheltering its colony of mice and frowning a dull and lifeless mass upon the panelled room, save when, responding to the roll of heavy waggons in the street, without, it quaked with sturdy tremblings and caused the bright eyes of its tiny citizens to grow brighter still with fear, and struck them motionless with attentive ear and palpitating heart until the alarm had passed away. In this dark corner was arranged, with scrupulous care, all Kate's little finery for the day, each article of dress partaking of that indescribable air of jauntiness and individuality which empty garments, whether by association or that they become moulded, as it were, to the owner's form, will take in eyes accustomed to or picturing the wearer's smartness. In place of a bale of musty goods there lay the black silk dress, the neatest possible figure in itself. The small shoes, with toes delicately turned out, stood upon the very pressure of some old iron weight,
and a pile of harsh discoloured leather had unconsciously given place to the very same little pair of black silk stockings which had been the objects of Mrs. Nickleby's peculiar care. Rats and mice and such small gear had long ago been starved or had emigrated to better quarters, and in their stead appeared gloves, bands, scarfs, hairpins, and many other little devices almost as ingenious in their way as rats and mice themselves for the tantalization of mankind. About and among them all moved Kate herself, not the least beautiful or unwonted relief to the stern old gloomy building. In good time or in bad time, as the reader likes to take it, for Mrs. Nickleby's impatience went a great deal faster than the clocks at that end of the town, and Kate was dressed to the very last hairpin a full hour and a half before it was at all necessary to begin to think about it. In good time or in bad time, the toilet was completed, and it being at length the hour agreed upon for starting, the milkman fetched a coach from the nearest stand, and Kate, with many adieux to her mother and many kind messages to Miss La Creevy, who was to come to tea, seated herself in it and went away in state, if ever anybody went away in state in a hackney coach yet. And the coach, and the coachman, and the horses rattled and jangled and whipped and cursed and swore and tumbled on together until they came to Golden Square. The coachman gave a tremendous double knock at the door, which was opened long before he had done, as quickly as if there had been a man behind it, with his hand tied to the latch. Kate, who had expected no more uncommon appearance than Newman Noggs in a clean shirt, was not a little astonished to see that the opener was a man in handsome livery, and that there were 2 or 3 others in the hall. There was no doubt about its being the right house, however, for there was the name upon the door. So she accepted the laced coat-sleeve which was tendered her, and entered the house, was ushered upstairs into a back drawing-room, where she was left alone. If she had been surprised at the apparition of the footman, she was perfectly absorbed in amazement at the richness and splendour of the furniture. The softest and most elegant carpets, the most exquisite pictures, the costliest mirrors, articles of richest ornament, quite dazzling from their beauty and perplexing from the prodigality with which they were scattered around, encountered her on every side. The very staircase nearly down to the hall door was crammed with beautiful and luxurious things, as though the house were brimful of riches, which, with a very trifling addition, would fairly run over into the street. Presently she heard a series of loud double knocks at the street door, and after every knock some new voice in the next room. The tones of Mr. Ralph Nickleby were easily distinguishable at first, but by degrees they merged into the general buzz of conversation, and all she could ascertain was that there were several gentlemen with no very musical voices who talked very loud, laughed very heartily, and swore more than she would have thought quite necessary. But this was a question of taste. At length the door opened, and Ralph himself, divested of his boots and ceremoniously embellished with black silks and shoes, presented his crafty face. "I couldn't see you before, my dear," he said in a low tone and pointing as he spoke to the next room. "I was engaged in receiving them. Now, shall I take you in?" "Oh, pray, uncle," said Kate, a little flurried, as people much more conversant with society often are when they are about to enter a room full of strangers and have had time to think of it previously. "Are there any ladies here?" "No," said Ralph shortly. "I don't know any." "Must I go in immediately?" asked Kate, drawing back a little. "As you please," said Ralph, shrugging his shoulders. "They are all come, and dinner will be announced directly afterwards. That's all." Kate would have entreated a few minutes' respite, but reflecting that her uncle might consider the payment of the hackney coach fare a sort of bargain for her punctuality, she suffered him to draw her arm through his and to lead her away. 7 or 8 gentlemen were standing round the fire when they went in, and, as they were talking very loud, were not aware of their entrance until Mr. Ralph Nickleby, touching one on the coat-sleeve, said in a harsh, emphatic voice, as if to attract general attention, "Lord Frederick Verisopht, my niece, Miss Nickleby." The group dispersed, as if in great surprise, and the gentleman addressed, turning round, exhibited a suit of clothes of the most superlative cut, a pair of whiskers of similar quality, a moustache, a head of hair, and a young face.
"Eh?"
said the gentleman.
"What the devil!"
With which broken ejaculations he fixed his glass in his eye and stared at Miss Nickleby in great surprise.
"My niece, my lord,"
said Ralph.
"Then my ears did not deceive me, and it's not a waxwork," said his lordship. "How-de-do? I'm very happy."
And then his lordship turned to another superlative gentleman, something older, something stouter, something redder in the face, and something longer upon town, and said in a loud whisper that the girl was devilish pitty.
"Introduce me, Nickleby,"
said this second gentleman, who was lounging with his back to the fire and both elbows on the chimney-piece.
"Sir Mulberry Hawk," said Ralph.
"Otherwise the most knowing card in the pack, Miss Nickleby," said Lord Frederick Verisopht.
"Don't leave me out, Nickleby,"
cried a sharp-faced gentleman who was sitting on a low chair with a high back, reading the paper.
"Mr. Pike,"
said Ralph.
"Nor me, Nickleby,"
cried a gentleman with a flushed face and a flash air from the elbow of Sir Mulberry Hawk.
"Mr. Pluck,"
said Ralph. Then wheeling about again towards a gentleman with the neck of a stork and the legs of no animal in particular, Ralph introduced him as the Honourable Mr. Snob, and a white-headed person at the table as Colonel Chowser. The colonel was in conversation with somebody who appeared to be a make-weight and was not introduced at all. There were two circumstances which, in this early stage of the party, struck home to Kate's bosom and brought the blood tingling to her face. One was the flippant contempt with which the guests evidently regarded her uncle, and the other the easy insolence of their manner towards herself. That the first symptom was very likely to lead to the aggravation of the second, it needed no great penetration to foresee. And here Mr. Ralph Nickleby had reckoned without his host, for however fresh from the country a young lady, by nature, may be, and however unacquainted with conventional behaviour, the chances are that she will have quite as strong an innate sense of the decencies and proprieties of life as if she had run the gauntlet of a dozen London seasons, possibly a stronger one, for such senses have been known to blunt in this improving process. When Ralph had completed the ceremonial of introduction, he led his blushing niece to a seat. As he did so, he glanced warily round as though to assure himself of the impression which her unlooked-for appearance had created.
"An unexpected pleasure, Nickleby,"
said Lord Frederick Verisopht, taking his glass out of his right eye, where it had until now done duty on Kate, and fixing it in his left to bring it to bear on Ralph.
"Designed to surprise you, Lord Frederick,"
said Mr. Pluck.
"Not a bad idea," said his lordship, "and one that would almost warrant the addition of an extra 2.5%.
"Nickleby," said Sir Mulberry Hawk in a thick, coarse voice,
"take the hint and tack it on the other 25 or whatever it is, and give me half for the advice."
Sir Mulberry garnished this speech with a hoarse laugh and terminated it with a pleasant oath regarding Mr. Nickleby's limbs, whereat Messrs. Pike and Pluck laughed consumedly. These gentlemen had not yet quite recovered the jest when dinner was announced, and then they were thrown into fresh ecstasies by a similar cause. For Sir Mulberry Hawk, in an excess of humour, shot dexterously past Lord Frederick Verisopht, who was about to lead Kate downstairs, and drew her arm through his up to the elbow.
"No, damn it, Verisopht," said Sir Mulberry. "Fair play's a jewel, and Miss Nickleby and I settled the matter with our eyes 10 minutes ago."
laughed the Honourable Mr. Snob. "Very good, very good." Rendered additionally witty by this applause, Sir Mulberry Hawk leered upon his friends most facetiously and led Kate downstairs with an air of familiarity which roused in her gentle breast such burning indignation as she felt it almost impossible to repress. Nor was the intensity of these feelings at all diminished when she found herself placed at the top of the table with Sir Mulberry Hawk and Lord Frederick Verisopht on either side.
"Oh, you have found your way into our neighbourhood, have you?" said Sir Mulberry as his lordship sat down.
"Of course," replied Lord Frederick, fixing his eyes on Miss Nickleby. "How can you ask me?"
"Well, you attend to your dinner," said Sir Mulberry, "and don't mind Miss Nickleby and me, for we shall prove very indifferent company, I dare say."
"I wish you would interfere here, Nickleby," said Lord Frederick.
"What is the matter, my lord?"
demanded Ralph from the bottom of the table, where he was supported by Messrs. Pyke and Pluck.
"This fellow Hawk is monopolizing your niece," said Lord Frederick.
"He has a tolerable share of everything that you lay claim to, my lord," said Ralph with a sneer.
"Gad, so he has," replied the young man. "Devil take me if I know which is master in my house, he or I."
"I know," muttered Ralph.
"I think I shall cut him off with a shilling," said the young nobleman jocosely.
"No, no, curse it!" said Sir Mulberry.
"When you come to the shilling, the last shilling, I'll cut you fast enough. But till then, I'll never leave you. You may take your oath of it."
This sally, which was strictly founded on fact, was received with a general roar, above which was plainly distinguishable the laughter of Mr. Pyke and Mr. Pluck, who were evidently Sir Mulberry's toads in ordinary. Indeed, it was not difficult to see that the majority of the company preyed upon the unfortunate young lord, who, weak and silly as he was, appeared by far the least vicious of the party. Sir Mulberry Hawk was remarkable for his tact in ruining, by himself and his creatures, young gentlemen of fortune, a genteel and elegant profession of which he had undoubtedly gained the head. With all the boldness of an original genius, he had struck out an entirely new course of treatment, quite opposed to the usual method, his custom being, when he had gained the ascendancy over those he took in hand, rather to keep them down than to give them their own way, and to exercise his vivacity upon them openly and without reserve. Thus he made them butts in a double sense, and while he emptied them with great address, caused them to ring with sundry well-administered taps for the diversion of society. The dinner was as remarkable for the splendour and completeness of its appointments as the mansion itself, and the company were remarkable for doing it ample justice, in which respect Messrs. Pyke and Pluck particularly signalized themselves, these two gentlemen eating of every dish and drinking of every bottle with a capacity and perseverance truly astonishing. They were remarkably fresh, too, notwithstanding their great exertions, for on the appearance of the dessert they broke out again as if nothing serious had taken place since breakfast.
"Well," said Lord Frederick, sipping his first glass of port, "if this is a discounting dinner, all I have to say is, devil take me if it wouldn't be a good plan to get a discount every day."
"You'll have plenty of it in your time," returned Sir Mulberry Hawk. "Nickleby will tell you that."
"What do you say, Nickleby?" inquired the young man. "Am I to be a good customer?"
"It depends entirely on circumstances, my lord," replied Ralph.
"On your lordship's circumstances,"
interposed Colonel Chowser of the militia and the racecourses. The gallant colonel glanced at Messrs. Pyke and Pluck as if he thought they ought to laugh at his joke, but those gentlemen, being only engaged to laugh for Sir Mulberry Hawk, were, to his signal discomfiture, as grave as a pair of undertakers. To add to his defeat, Sir Mulberry, considering any such efforts an invasion of his peculiar privilege, eyed the offender steadily through his glass, as if astonished at his presumption, and audibly stated his impression that it was an infernal liberty, which being a hint to Lord Frederick, he put up HIS glass and surveyed the object of censure as if he were some extraordinary wild animal then exhibiting for the first time. As a matter of course, Messrs. Pyke and Pluck stared at the individual whom Sir Mulberry Hawk stared at. So the poor colonel, to hide his confusion, was reduced to the necessity of holding his port before his right eye and affecting to scrutinize its colour with the most lively interest. All this while Kate had sat as silently as she could, scarcely daring to raise her eyes lest they should encounter the admiring gaze of Lord Frederick Verisopht, or, what was still more embarrassing, the bold looks of his friend Sir Mulberry. The latter gentleman was obliging enough to direct general attention towards her.
"Here is Miss Nickleby," observed Sir Mulberry, "wondering why the deuce somebody doesn't make love to her."
"No, indeed," said Kate, looking hastily up. "I—" And then she stopped, feeling it would have been better to have said nothing at all.
"I'll hold any man £50," said Sir Mulberry, "that Miss Nickleby can't look in my face and tell me she wasn't thinking so."
"Done!" cried the noble gull.
"Within 10 minutes?" "Done!" responded Sir Mulberry.
The money was produced on both sides, and the Honourable Mr. Snob was elected to the double office of stakeholder and timekeeper. "Pray," said Kate in great confusion while these preliminaries were in course of completion, "pray do not make me the subject of any bets, uncle. I cannot really—"
"Why not, my dear?"
replied Ralph, in whose grating voice, however, there was an unusual huskiness, as though he spoke unwillingly and would rather that the proposition had not been broached.
"It is done in a moment. There is nothing in it. If the gentlemen insist on it—" "I don't insist on it," said Sir Mulberry with a loud laugh. "That is, I by no means insist upon Miss Nickleby's making the denial, for if she does, I lose. But I shall be glad to see her bright eyes, especially as she favours the mahogany so much." "So she does, and it's too bad of you, Miss Nickleby," said the noble youth.
"Quite cruel," said Mr. Pyke. "Horrid cruel," said Mr. Pluck.
"I don't care if I do lose," said Sir Mulberry, "for one tolerable look at Miss Nickleby's eyes is worth double the money."
"More," said Mr. Pyke. "Far more," said Mr. Pluck.
"How goes the enemy, Snob?"
asked Sir Mulberry Hawk. 4 minutes gone."
"Bravo!" "Won't you make one effort for me, Miss Nickleby?" asked Lord Frederick after a short interval. "You needn't trouble yourself to inquire, my buck," said Sir Mulberry. "Miss Nickleby and I understand each other. She declares on my side and shows her taste. You haven't a chance, old fellow. Time, Snob?"
8 minutes gone."
"Get the money ready," said Sir Mulberry. "You'll soon hand over."
laughed Mr. Pyke. Mr. Pluck, who always came second and topped his companion if he could, screamed outright. The poor girl, who was so overwhelmed with confusion that she scarcely knew what she did, had determined to remain perfectly quiet. But fearing that by so doing she might seem to countenance Sir Mulberry's boast, which had been uttered with great coarseness and vulgarity of manner, raised her eyes and looked him in the face. There was something so odious, so insolent, so repulsive in the look which met her, that, without the power to stammer forth a syllable, she rose and hurried from the room. She restrained her tears by a great effort until she was alone upstairs, and then gave them vent.
"Capital!"
said Sir Mulberry Hawk, putting the stakes in his pocket.
"That's a girl of spirit. We'll drink her health."
It is needless to say that Pyke and Co. responded with great warmth of manner to this proposal, or that the toast was drunk with many little insinuations from the firm relative to the completeness of Sir Mulberry's conquest. Ralph, who, while the attention of the other guests were attracted to the principals in the preceding scene, had eyed them like a wolf, appeared to breathe more freely now his niece was gone. The decanters passing quickly round, he leaned back in his chair and turned his eyes from speaker to speaker as they warmed with wine, with looks that seemed to search their hearts and lay bare, for his distempered sport, every idle thought within them. Meanwhile Kate, left wholly to herself, had in some degree recovered her composure. She had learnt from a female attendant that her uncle wished to see her before she left, and had also gleaned the satisfactory intelligence that the gentleman would take coffee at table. The prospect of seeing them no more contributed greatly to calm her agitation, and taking up a book she composed herself to read. She started sometimes when the sudden opening of the dining-room door let loose a wild shout of noisy revelry, and more than once rose in great alarm as a fancied footstep on the staircase impressed her with the fear that some stray member of the party was returning alone. Nothing occurring, however, to realize her apprehensions, she endeavoured to fix her attention more closely on her book, in which by degrees she became so much interested that she had read on through several chapters without heed of time or place, when she was terrified by suddenly hearing her name pronounced by a man's voice close at her ear. The book fell from her hand. Lounging on an ottoman close beside her was Sir Mulberry Hawk, evidently the worse, if a man be a ruffian at heart he is never the better, for wine.
"What a delightful studiousness!" said this accomplished gentleman. "Was it real now, or only to display the eyelashes?"
Kate, looking anxiously towards the door, made no reply.
"I have looked at him for 5 minutes," said Sir Mulberry. "Upon my soul, they're perfect. Why did I speak and destroy such a pretty little picture?"
"Do me the favour to be silent now, sir," replied Kate.
"No, don't,"
said Sir Mulberry, folding his crushed hat to lay his elbow on and bringing himself still closer to the young lady.
"Upon my life, you oughtn't to. Such a devoted slave of yours, Miss Nickleby. It's an infernal thing to treat him so harshly. Upon my soul, it is."
"I wish you to understand, sir," said Kate, trembling in spite of herself, but speaking with great indignation, "that your behaviour offends and disgusts me. If you have a spark of gentlemanly feeling remaining, you will leave me."
"Now why," said Sir Mulberry, "will you keep up this appearance of excessive rigour, my sweet creature? Now be more natural, my dear Miss Nickleby, be more natural, do."
Kate hastily rose, but as she rose, Sir Mulberry caught her dress and forcibly detained her. "Let me go, sir!" she cried, her heart swelling with anger. "Do you hear? Instantly! This moment!"
"Sit down, sit down," said Sir Mulberry. "I want to talk to you."
"Unhand me, sir, this instant!" cried Kate.
"Not for the world,"
rejoined Sir Mulberry. Thus speaking, he leaned over as if to replace her in her chair, but the young lady, making a violent effort to disengage herself, he lost his balance and measured his length upon the ground. As Kate sprung forward to leave the room, Mr. Ralph Nickleby appeared in the doorway and confronted her.
"What is this?"
said Ralph. "It is this, sir," replied Kate, violently agitated, "that beneath the roof where I, a helpless girl, your dead brother's child, should most have found protection, I have been exposed to insult which should make you shrink to look upon me. Let me pass you." Ralph did shrink, as the indignant girl fixed her kindling eye upon him. But he did not comply with her injunction, nevertheless, for he led her to a distant seat, and returning and approaching Sir Mulberry Hawk, who had by this time risen, motioned towards the door.
"Your way lies there, sir,"
said Ralph in a suppressed voice that some devil might have owned with pride.
"What do you mean by that?"
demanded his friend fiercely. The swollen veins stood out like sinews on Ralph's wrinkled forehead, and the nerves about his mouth worked as though some unendurable emotion wrung them. But he smiled disdainfully, and again pointed to the door. "Do you know me, you old madman?" asked Sir Mulberry. "Well," said Ralph. The fashionable vagabond for the moment quite quailed under the steady look of the older sinner, and walked towards the door, muttering as he went. "You wanted the Lord, did you?" he said, stopping short when he reached the door, as if a new light had broken in upon him, and confronting Ralph again. "Damn! I was in the way, was I?" Ralph smiled again, but made no answer. "Who brought him to you first?" pursued Sir Mulberry. "And how, without me, could you ever have wound him in your net as you have?" "The net is a large one and rather full," said Ralph. "Take care that it chokes nobody in the meshes." "You would sell your flesh and blood for money yourself if you have not already made a bargain with the devil," retorted the other. "Do you mean to tell me that your pretty niece was not brought here as a decoy for the drunken boy downstairs?" Although this hurried dialogue was carried on in a suppressed tone on both sides, Ralph looked involuntarily round to ascertain that Kate had not moved her position so as to be within hearing. His adversary saw the advantage he had gained and followed it up. "Do you mean to tell me," he asked again, "that it is not so? Do you mean to say that if he had found his way up here instead of me, you wouldn't have been a little more blind and a little more deaf and a little less flourishing than you have been? Come, Nickleby, answer me that." "I'll tell you this," replied Ralph, "that if I brought her here as a matter of business—" "Aye, that's the word," interposed Sir Mulberry with a laugh. "You're coming to yourself again now." "As a matter of business," pursued Ralph, speaking slowly and firmly, as a man who has made up his mind to say no more, "because I thought she might make some impression on the silly youth you have taken in hand and are lending good help to ruin. I knew, knowing him, that it would be long before he outraged her girl's feelings, and that unless he offended by mere puppyism and emptiness, he would, with a little management, respect the sex and conduct even of his usurer's niece. But if I thought to draw him on more gently by this device, I did not think of subjecting the girl to the licentiousness and brutality of so old a hand as you. And now we understand each other." "Especially as there was nothing to be got by it, eh?" sneered Sir Mulberry. "Exactly so," said Ralph. He had turned away and looked over his shoulder to make this last reply. The eyes of the two worthies met with an expression as if each rascal felt that there was no disguising himself from the other, and Sir Mulberry Hawk shrugged his shoulders and walked slowly out. His friend closed the door and looked restlessly towards the spot where his niece still remained in the attitude in which he had left her. She had flung herself heavily upon the couch, and with her head drooping over the cushion and her face hidden in her hands, seemed to be still weeping in an agony of shame and grief. Ralph would have walked into any poverty-stricken debtor's house and pointed him out to a bailiff, though in attendance upon a young child's death-bed, without the smallest concern, because it would have been a matter quite in the ordinary course of business, and the man would have been an offender against his only code of morality. But here was a young girl who had done no wrong save that of coming into the world alive, who had patiently yielded to all his wishes, who had tried hard to please him, above all, who didn't owe him money, and he felt awkward and nervous. Ralph took a chair at some distance, then another chair a little nearer, then moved a little nearer still, then nearer again, and finally sat himself on the sofa and laid his hand on Kate's arm. "Hush, my dear," he said, as she drew it back and her sobs burst out afresh. "Hush, hush! Don't mind it now. Don't think of it." "Oh, for pity's sake, let me go home!" cried Kate. "Let me leave this house and go home." "Yes, yes," said Ralph. "You shall. But you must dry your eyes first and compose yourself. Let me raise your head. There. There!"
"Oh, uncle!" exclaimed Kate, clasping her hands. "What have I done? What have I done, that you should subject me to this? If I had wronged you in thought, or word, or deed, it would have been most cruel to me, and the memory of one you must have loved in some old time. But—"
"Only listen to me for a moment," interrupted Ralph, seriously alarmed by the violence of her emotions. "I didn't know it would be so. It was impossible for me to foresee it. I did all I could. Come, let us walk about. You are faint with the closeness of the room and the heat of these lamps. You'll be better now if you make the slightest effort."
"I will do anything," replied Kate, "if you will only send me home."
"Well, well, I will," said Ralph. "But you must get back your own looks, for those you have will frighten them, and nobody must know of this but you and I. Now, let us walk the other way. There! You look better even now." With such encouragements as these, Ralph Nickleby walked to and fro, with his niece leaning on his arm, actually trembling beneath her touch. In the same manner, when he judged it prudent to allow her to depart, he supported her downstairs, after adjusting her shawl and performing such little offices, most probably for the first time in his life. Across the hall and down the steps Ralph led her too, nor did he withdraw his hand until she was seated in the coach. As the door of the vehicle was roughly closed, a comb fell from Kate's hair, close at her uncle's feet, and as he picked it up and returned it into her hand, the light of a neighbouring lamp shone upon her face. The lock of hair that had escaped and curled loosely over her brow, the traces of tears yet scarcely dry, the flushed cheek, the look of sorrow, all fired some dormant train of recollection in the old man's breast, and the face of his dead brother seemed present before him, with the very look it bore on some occasion of boyish grief, of which every minutest circumstance flashed upon his mind, with the distinctness of a scene of yesterday. Ralph Nickleby was proof against all appeals of blood and kindred, who was steeled against every tale of sorrow and distress, staggered while he looked, and went back into his house as a man who had seen a spirit from some world beyond the grave. End of chapter 19. Of the Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Chapter 20. Wherein Nicholas at length encounters his uncle, to whom he expresses his sentiments with much candour. His resolution. Little Miss La Creevy trotted briskly through divers streets at the west end of the town early on Monday morning, the day after the dinner, charged with the important commission of acquainting Madame Mantalini that Miss Nickleby was too unwell to attend that day, but hoped to be enabled to resume her duties on the morrow. And as Miss La Creevy walked along, revolving in her mind various genteel forms and elegant turns of expression with a view to the selection of the very best in which to couch her communication, she cogitated a good deal upon the probable causes of her young friend's indisposition.
"I don't know what to make of it," said Miss La Creevy. "Her eyes were decidedly red last night. She said she had a headache. Headaches don't occasion red eyes. She must have been crying."
Arriving at this conclusion, which indeed she had established to her perfect satisfaction on the previous evening, Miss La Creevy went on to consider, as she had done nearly all night, what new cause of unhappiness her young friend could possibly have had.
"I can't think of anything,"
said the little portrait painter.
"Nothing at all. Unless it was the behaviour of that old bear. Cross to her, I suppose. Unpleasant brute."
Relieved by this expression of opinion, albeit it was vented upon empty air, Miss La Creevy trotted on to Madame Mantalini's, and being informed that the governing power was not yet out of bed, requested an interview with the second in command, whereupon Miss Knag appeared.
"So far as I am concerned," said Miss Knag when the message had been delivered, with many ornaments of speech, "I could spare Miss Nickleby for evermore." "Oh, indeed, ma'am," rejoined Miss La Creevy, highly offended. "But, you see, you are not the mistress of the business, and therefore it's of no great consequence." "Very good, ma'am," said Miss Knag. "Have you any further commands for me?" "No, I have not, ma'am," rejoined Miss La Creevy. "Then good morning, ma'am," said Miss Knag. "Good morning to you, ma'am, and many obligations for your extreme politeness and good breeding," rejoined Miss La Creevy. Thus terminating the interview, during which both ladies had trembled very much and been marvellously polite, certain indications that they were within an inch of a very desperate quarrel, Miss La Creevy bounced out of the room and into the street. "I wonder who that is," said the queer little soul. "A nice person to know, I should think. I wish I had the painting of her. I'd do her justice." So, feeling quite satisfied that she had said a very cutting thing at Miss Knag's expense, Miss La Creevy had a hearty laugh and went home to breakfast in great good humour. Here was one of the advantages of having lived alone so long. The little bustling, active, cheerful creature existed entirely within herself, talked to herself, made a confidant of herself, was as sarcastic as she could be on people who offended her by herself, pleased herself, and did no harm. If she indulged in scandal, nobody's reputation suffered, and if she enjoyed a little bit of revenge, no living soul was one atom the worse. One of the many to whom, from straitened circumstances, a consequent inability to form the associations they would wish, and a disinclination to mix with the society they could obtain, London is as complete a solitude as the plains of Syria, the humble artist had pursued her lonely but contented way for many years, and, until the peculiar misfortunes of the Nickleby family attracted her attention, had made no friends, though brimful of the friendliest feelings to all mankind. There are many warm hearts in the same solitary guise as poor little Miss La Creevy's. However, that's neither here nor there just now. She went home to breakfast and had scarcely caught the full flavour of her first sip of tea when the servant announced a gentleman, whereat Miss La Creevy, at once imagining a new sitter, transfixed by admiration at the street-door case, was in unspeakable consternation at the presence of the tea-things. "Here, take him away. Run with him into the bedroom, anywhere," said Miss La Creevy. "Dear, dear, to think that I should be late on this particular morning of all others, after being ready for 3 weeks by 8:30 o'clock and not a soul coming near the place." "Don't let me put you out of the way," said a voice Miss La Creevy knew. "I told the servant not to mention my name because I wished to surprise you." "Mr. Nicholas!"
cried Miss La Creevy, starting in great astonishment. "You have not forgotten me, I see," replied Nicholas, extending his hand.
"Why, I think I should even have known you if I had met you in the street," said Miss La Creevy with a smile. "Hannah, another cup and saucer. Now, I'll tell you what, young man, I'll trouble you not to repeat the impertinence you were guilty of on the morning you went away."
"You would not be very angry, would you?" asked Nicholas.
"Wouldn't I?" said Miss La Creevy. "You had better try, that's all."
Nicholas, with becoming gallantry, immediately took Miss La Creevy at her word, who uttered a faint scream and slapped his face, but it was not a very hard slap, and that's the truth.
"I never saw such a rude creature!"
exclaimed Miss La Creevy. "You told me to try," said Nicholas.
"Well, but I was speaking ironically,"
rejoined Miss La Creevy. "Oh, that's another thing," said Nicholas. "You should have told me that too."
"I dare say you didn't know, indeed," retorted Miss La Creevy. "But now I look at you again, you seem thinner than when I saw you last, and your face is haggard and pale. And how come you to have left Yorkshire?" She stopped here,
for there was so much heart in her altered tone and manner that Nicholas was quite moved. "I need look somewhat changed," he said after a short silence, "for I have undergone some suffering, both of mind and body, since I left London. I have been very poor too, and have even suffered from want."
"Good heaven, Mr. Nicholas!"
exclaimed Miss La Creevy.
"What are you telling me?"
"Nothing which need distress you quite so much," answered Nicholas with a more sprightly air. "Neither did I come here to bewail my lot, but on matter more to the purpose. I wish to meet my uncle face to face. I should tell you that first."
"Then all I have to say about that is,"
interposed Miss La Creevy,
"that I don't envy you your taste, and that sitting in the same room with his very boots would put me out of humour for a fortnight."
"In the main," said Nicholas, "there may be no great difference of opinion between you and me, so far. But you will understand that I desire to confront him, to justify myself, and to cast his duplicity and malice in his throat."
"That's quite another matter,"
rejoined Miss La Creevy.
"Heaven forgive me, but I shouldn't cry my eyes quite out of my head if they choked him. Well!"
"To this end I called upon him this morning," said Nicholas. "He only returned to town on Saturday, and I knew nothing of his arrival until late last night."
"And did you see him?"
asked Miss La Creevy. "No," replied Nicholas. "He had gone out."
"Ha!"
said Miss La Creevy.
"On some kind, charitable business, I dare say."
"I have reason to believe," pursued Nicholas, "from what has been told me by a friend of mine who is acquainted with his movements, that he intends seeing my mother and sister to-day and giving them his version of the occurrences that have befallen me. I will meet him there."
"That's right,"
said Miss La Creevy, rubbing her hands.
"And yet, I don't know," she added. "There is much to be thought of, others to be considered."
"I have considered others," rejoined Nicholas, "but as honesty and honour are both at issue, nothing shall deter me."
"You should know best,"
said Miss La Creevy. "In this case, I hope so," answered Nicholas. "And all I want you to do for me is to prepare them for my coming. They think me a long way off, and if I went wholly unexpected, I should frighten them. If you can spare time to tell them that you have seen me and that I shall be with them in a quarter of an hour afterwards, you will do me a great service."
"I wish I could do you or any of you a greater," said Miss La Creevy, "but the power to serve is as seldom joined with the will as the will is with the power, I think."
Talking on very fast and very much, Miss La Creevy finished her breakfast with great expedition, put away the tea-caddy and hid the key under the fender, resumed her bonnet, and, taking Nicholas's arm, sallied forth at once to the city. Nicholas left her near the door of his mother's house and promised to return within a quarter of an hour. It so chanced that Ralph Nickleby, at length seeing fit, for his own purposes, to communicate the atrocities of which Nicholas had been guilty, had, instead of first proceeding to another quarter of the town on business, as Newman Noggs supposed he would, gone straight to his sister-in-law. Hence, when Miss La Creevy, admitted by a girl who was cleaning the house, made her way to the sitting-room, she found Mrs. Nickleby and Kate in tears, and Ralph just concluding his statement of his nephew's misdemeanours. Kate beckoned her not to retire, and Miss La Creevy took a seat in silence. "You are here already, are you, my gentleman?" thought the little woman. "Then he shall announce himself and see what effect that has on you." "This is pretty," said Ralph, folding up Miss Squeers's note. "Very pretty. I recommend him, against all my previous conviction, for I knew he would never do any good, to a man with whom, behaving himself properly, he might have remained in comfort for years. What is the result? Conduct for which he might hold up his hand at the Old Bailey."
"I never will believe it,"
said Kate indignantly.
"Never. It is some base conspiracy which carries its own falsehood with it."
"My dear," said Ralph,
You wrong the worthy man. These are not inventions. The man is assaulted. Your brother is not to be found. This boy of whom they speak goes with him. Remember, remember!"
"It is impossible,"
said Kate.
"Nicholas, and a thief too! Mamma, how can you sit and hear such statements?"
Poor Mrs. Nickleby, who had at no time been remarkable for the possession of a very clear understanding, and who had been reduced by the late changes in her affairs to a most complicated state of perplexity, made no other reply to this earnest remonstrance than exclaiming from behind a mass of pocket-handkerchief that she never could have believed it, thereby most ingeniously leaving her hearers to suppose that she did believe it. "It would be my duty, if he came in my way, to deliver him up to justice," said Ralph. "My bounden duty. I should have no other course, as a man of the world and a man of business, to pursue. And yet," said Ralph, speaking in a very marked manner and looking furtively but fixedly at Kate, "and yet I would not. I would spare the feelings of his sister. And his mother, of course," added Ralph as though by an afterthought and with far less emphasis. Kate very well understood that this was held out as an additional inducement to her to preserve the strictest silence regarding the events of the preceding night. She looked involuntarily towards Ralph as he ceased to speak, but he had turned his eyes another way and seemed for the moment quite unconscious of her presence. "Everything," said Ralph after a long silence, broken only by Mrs. Nickleby's sobs, "everything combines to prove the truth of this letter, if indeed there were any possibility of disputing it. Do innocent men steal away from the sight of honest folks and skulk in hiding-places like outlaws? Do innocent men inveigle nameless vagabonds and prowl with them about the country as idle robbers do? Assault, riot, theft, what do you call these?" "A lie!" cried a voice as the door was dashed open and Nicholas came into the room. In the first moment of surprise, and possibly of alarm, Ralph rose from his seat and fell back a few paces, quite taken off his guard by this unexpected apparition. In another moment he stood, fixed and immovable, with folded arms, regarding his nephew with a scowl, while Kate and Miss La Creevy threw themselves between the two to prevent the personal violence which the fierce excitement of Nicholas appeared to threaten.
"Dear Nicholas,"
cried his sister, clinging to him, "be calm. Consider." "Consider, Kate!" cried Nicholas, clasping her hand so tight in the tumult of his anger that she could scarcely bear the pain. "When I consider all and think of what has passed, I need be made of iron to stand before him." "Or bronze," said Ralph quietly. "There is not hardihood enough in flesh and blood to face it out."
"Oh, dear, dear!" cried Mrs. Nickleby. "That thing should have come to such a pass as this!"
"Who speaks in a tone as if I had done wrong and brought disgrace on them?" said Nicholas, looking round. "Your mother, sir," replied Ralph, motioning towards her. "Whose ears have been poisoned by you," said Nicholas. "By you, who, under pretence of deserving the thanks she poured upon you, heaped every insult, wrong, and indignity upon my head. You who sent me to a den where sordid cruelty, worthy of yourself, runs wanton, and youthful misery stalks precocious, where the lightness of childhood shrinks into the heaviness of age, and its every promise blights and withers as it grows. I call heaven to witness," said Nicholas, looking eagerly round, "that I have seen all this, and that he knows it."
"Refute these calumnies," said Kate, "and be more patient, so that you may give them no advantage. Tell us what you really did, and show they are untrue."
"Of what do they, or of what does he, accuse me?" said Nicholas. "First, of attacking your master, and being within an ace of qualifying yourself to be tried for murder," interposed Ralph. "I speak plainly, young man, bluster as you will." "I interfered," said Nicholas, "to save a miserable creature from the vilest cruelty. In so doing, I inflicted such punishment upon a wretch as he will not readily forget, though far less than he deserved from me. If the same scene were renewed before me now, I would take the same part, but I would strike harder and heavier, and brand him with such marks as he should carry to his grave, go to it when he would. You hear?" said Ralph, turning to Mrs. Nickleby. "Penitence, this."
"Oh, dear me!" cried Mrs. Nickleby. "I don't know what to think. I really don't."
"Do not speak just now, mamma, I entreat you," said Kate. "Dear Nicholas, I only tell you that you may know what wickedness can prompt, but they accuse you of a ring is missing, and they dare to say that—"
"The woman," said Nicholas haughtily, "the wife of the fellow from whom these charges come, dropped, as I suppose, a worthless ring among some clothes of mine early in the morning on which I left the house. At least, I know that she was in the bedroom where they lay, struggling with an unhappy child, and that I found it when I opened my bundle on the road. I returned it at once by coach, and they have it now."
I knew, said Kate, looking towards her uncle. "About this boy, love. In whose company they say you left?"
"The boy, a silly, helpless creature, from brutality and hard usage, is with me now," rejoined Nicholas. "You hear?" said Ralph, appealing to the mother again. "Everything proved, even upon his own confession. Do you choose to restore that boy, sir?"
"No, I do not," replied Nicholas.
"You do not?" sneered Ralph. "No," repeated Nicholas, "not to the man with whom I found him. I would that I knew on whom he has the claim of birth. I might wring something from his sense of shame if he were dead to every tie of nature." "Indeed?" said Ralph. "Now, sir, will you hear a word or two from me?" "You can speak when and what you please," replied Nicholas, embracing his sister. "I take little heed of what you say or threaten." "Mighty well, sir," retorted Ralph, "but perhaps it may concern others, who may think it worth their while to listen and consider what I tell them. I will address your mother, sir, who knows the world."
"Oh, and I only too dearly wish I didn't,"
sobbed Mrs. Nickleby. There really was no necessity for the good lady to be much distressed upon this particular head, the extent of her worldly knowledge being, to say the least, very questionable, and so Ralph seemed to think, for he smiled as she spoke. He then glanced steadily at her and Nicholas by turns as he delivered himself in these words. "Of what I have done, or what I meant to do, for you, ma'am, and my niece, I say not one syllable. I held out no promise, and leave you to judge for yourself. I hold out no threat now, but I say that this boy, headstrong, wilful, and disorderly as he is, should not have one penny of my money, or one crust of my bread, or one grasp of my hand to save him from the loftiest gallows in all Europe. I will not meet him, come where he comes, or hear his name. I will not help him, or those who help him. With a full knowledge of what he brought upon you by so doing, he has come back in his selfish sloth, to be an aggravation of your wants and a burden upon his sister's scanty wages. I regret to leave you, and more to leave her now, but I will not encourage this compound of meanness and cruelty, and as I will not ask you to renounce him, I see you no more." If Ralph had not known and felt his power in wounding those he hated, his glances at Nicholas would have shown it him in all its force as he proceeded into the above address. Innocent as the young man was of all wrong, every artful insinuation stung, every well-considered sarcasm cut him to the quick, and when Ralph noted his pale face and quivering lip, he hugged himself to mark how well he had chosen the taunts best calculated to strike deep into a young and ardent spirit.
"I can't help it,"
cried Mrs. Nickleby. "I know you have been very good to us and meant to do a good deal for my dear daughter. I am quite sure of that. I know you did, and it was very kind of you, having her at your house and all, and of course it would have been a great thing for her and for me too. But I can't, you know, brother-in-law, I can't renounce my own son, even if he has done all you say he has. It's not possible. I couldn't do it. So we must go to rack and ruin, Kate, my dear. I can bear it, I dare say." Pouring forth these and a perfectly wonderful train of other disjointed expressions of regret, which no mortal power but Mrs. Nickleby's could ever have strung together, that lady wrung her hands, and her tears fell faster.
"Why do you say, if Nicholas has done what they say he has, mamma?"
asked Kate with honest anger.
"You know he has not."
"I don't know what to think, one way or another, my dear," said Mrs. Nickleby. "Nicholas is so violent, and your uncle has so much composure, that I can only hear what he says and not what Nicholas does. Never mind, don't let us talk any more about it. We can go to the workhouse, or the refuge for the destitute, or the Magdalen Hospital, I dare say, and the sooner we go the better." With this extraordinary jumble of charitable institutions, Mrs. Nickleby again gave way to her tears. "Stay," said Nicholas as Ralph turned to go. "You need not leave this place, sir, for it will be relieved of my presence in 1 minute, and it will be long, very long, before I darken these doors again."
"Nicholas!"
cried Kate, throwing herself on her brother's shoulder.
"Do not say so. My dear brother, you will break my heart. Mamma, speak to him. Do not mind her, Nicholas. She does not mean it. You should know her better. Uncle, somebody, for heaven's sake, speak to him."
"I never meant, Kate," said Nicholas tenderly, "I never meant to stay among you. Think better of me than to suppose it possible. I may turn my back on this town a few hours sooner than I intended, but what of that? We shall not forget each other apart, and better days will come when we shall part no more. Be a woman, Kate," he whispered proudly, "and do not make me one while he looks on."
"No, no, I will not,"
said Kate eagerly.
"But you will not leave us? Oh, think of all the happy days we have had together before these terrible misfortunes came upon us, of all the comfort and happiness of home, and the trials we have to bear now, of our having no protector under all the slights and wrongs that poverty so much favours, and you cannot leave us to bear them alone, without one hand to help us."
"You will be helped when I am away," replied Nicholas hurriedly. "I am no help to you, no protector. I should bring you nothing but sorrow and want and suffering. My own mother sees it, and her fondness and fears for you point to the course that I should take. And so all good angels bless you, Kate, till I can carry you to some home of mine where we may revive the happiness denied to us now, and talk of these trials as of things gone by. Do not keep me here, but let me go at once. There, dear girl, dear girl." The grasp which had detained him relaxed, and Kate swooned in his arms. Nicholas stooped over her for a few seconds, and placing her gently in a chair, confided her to their honest friend. "I need not entreat your sympathy," he said, wringing her hand, "for I know your nature. You will never forget them." He stepped up to Ralph, who remained in the same attitude which he had preserved throughout the interview, and moved not a finger. "Whatever step you take, sir," he said in a voice inaudible beyond themselves, "I shall keep a strict account of. I leave them to you at your desire. There will be a day of reckoning sooner or later, and it will be a heavy one for you if they are wronged." Ralph did not allow a muscle of his face to indicate that he had heard one word of this parting address. He hardly knew that it was concluded, and Mrs. Nickleby had scarcely made up her mind to detain her son by force if necessary, when Nicholas was gone. As he hurried through the streets to his obscure lodging, seeking to keep pace, as it were, with the rapidity of the thoughts which crowded upon him, Many doubts and hesitations arose in his mind, and almost tempted him to return. But what would they gain by this? Supposing he were to put Ralph Nickleby at defiance, and were even fortunate enough to obtain some small employment, his being with them could only render their present condition worse, and might greatly impair their future prospects. For his mother had spoken of some new kindnesses towards Kate which she had not denied. No, thought Nicholas, I have acted for the best. But before he had gone 500 yards, some other and different feeling would come upon him, and then he would lag again, and pulling his hat over his eyes, give way to the melancholy reflections which pressed thickly upon him. To have committed no fault, and yet to be so entirely alone in the world, to be separated from the only persons he loved, and to be proscribed like a criminal when 6 months ago he had been surrounded by every comfort and looked up to as the chief hope of his family, this was hard to bear. He had not deserved it either. Well, there was comfort in that, and poor Nicholas would brighten up again, to be again depressed as his quickly shifting thoughts presented every variety of light and shade before him. Undergoing these alternations of hope and misgiving, which no one, placed in a situation of ordinary trial, can fail to have experienced, Nicholas at length reached his poor room, where, no longer borne up by the excitement which had hitherto sustained him, but depressed by the revulsion of feeling it left behind, he threw himself on the bed and turning his face to the wall, gave free vent to the emotions he had so long stifled. He had not heard anybody enter, and was unconscious of the presence of Smike, until, happening to raise his head, he saw him, standing at the upper end of the room, looking wistfully towards him. He withdrew his eyes when he saw that he was observed and affected to be busied with some scanty preparations for dinner. "Well, Smike," said Nicholas as cheerfully as he could speak, "let me hear what new acquaintances you have made this morning, or what new wonder you have found out in the compass of this street and the next one." "No," said Smike, shaking his head mournfully. "I must talk of something else to-day." "Of what you like," replied Nicholas good-humouredly. "Of this," said Smike. "I know you are unhappy and have got into great trouble by bringing me away. I ought to have known that and stopped behind. I would, indeed, if I had thought it then. You are not rich. You have not enough for yourself, and I should not be here. You grow," said the lad, laying his hand timidly on that of Nicholas, "you grow thinner every day. Your cheek is paler, and your eye more sunk. Indeed, I cannot bear to see you so, and think how I am burdening you. I tried to go away to-day, but the thought of your kind face drew me back. I could not leave you without a word." The poor fellow could say no more, for his eyes filled with tears, and his voice was gone. "The word which separates us," said Nicholas, grasping him heartily by the shoulder, "shall never be said by me, for you are my only comfort and stay. I would not lose you now, Smike, for all the world could give. The thought of you has upheld me through all I have endured to-day, and shall through 50 times such trouble. Give me your hand. My heart is linked to yours. We will journey from this place together before the week is out. What, if I am steeped in poverty? You lighten it, and we will be poor together." End of chapter 20. Of the Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Chapter 21. Madame Mantalini finds herself in a situation of some difficulty, and Miss Nickleby finds herself in no situation at all. The agitation she had undergone rendered Kate Nickleby unable to resume her duties at the dressmaker's for 3 days, at the expiration of which interval she betook herself at the accustomed hour, and with languid steps, to the temple of fashion where Madame Mantalini reigned paramount and supreme. The ill will of Miss Knag had lost nothing of its virulence in the interval. The young ladies still scrupulously shrunk from all companionship with their denounced associate, and when that exemplary female arrived a few minutes afterwards, she was at no pains to conceal the displeasure with which she regarded Kate's return.
"Upon my word,"
said Miss Knag, as the satellites flocked round to relieve her of her bonnet and shawl,
"I should have thought some people would have had spirit enough to stop away altogether when they know what an encumbrance their presence is to right-minded persons. But it's a queer world. Oh, it's a queer world."
Miss Knag, having passed this comment on the world in the tone in which most people do pass comments on the world when they are out of temper, that is to say, as if they by no means belonged to it, concluded by heaving a sigh wherewith she seemed meekly to compassionate the wickedness of mankind. The attendants were not slow to echo the sigh, and Miss Knag was apparently on the eve of favouring them with some further moral reflections when the voice of Madame Mantalini, conveyed through the speaking-tube, ordered Miss Nickleby upstairs to assist in the arrangement of the show-room, a distinction which caused Miss Knag to toss her head so much and bite her lips so hard that her powers of conversation were, for the time, annihilated.
"Well, Miss Nickleby, child,"
said Madame Mantalini when Kate presented herself,
"are you quite well again?" "A great deal better, thank you," replied Kate.
"I wish I could say the same," remarked Madame Mantalini, seating herself with an air of weariness. "Are you ill?" asked Kate. "I'm very sorry for that."
"Not exactly ill, but worried, child, worried,"
rejoined Madame.
"I am still more sorry to hear that," said Kate gently. "Bodily illness is more easy to bear than mental." "Ah, and it's so much easier to talk than to bear either," said Madame, rubbing her nose with such irritability of manner. "There, get your work, child. Put the things in order, do." While Kate was wondering within herself what these symptoms of unusual vexation portended, Mr. Mantalini put the tips of his whiskers, and by degrees his head, through the half-opened door, and cried in a soft voice, "Is my life and soul there?" "No," replied his wife. "How can it say so when it is blooming in the front room like a little rose in a demnition flower-pot?" urged Mantalini. "May its poppet come in and talk?" "Certainly not," replied Madame. "You know I never allow you here. Go along." The poppet, however, encouraged perhaps by the relenting tone of this reply, ventured to rebel, and stealing into the room, made towards Madame Mantalini on tiptoe, blowing her a kiss as he came along. "Why will it vex itself and twist its little face into bewitching nutcrackers?" said Mantalini, putting his left arm round the waist of his life and soul and drawing her towards him with his right. "Oh, I can't bear you!" replied his wife. "Not, eh? Not bear me?" exclaimed Mantalini. "Fibs, fibs! It couldn't be. There's not a woman alive that could tell me such a thing to my face, to my own face." Mr. Mantalini stroked his chin as he said this and glanced complacently at an opposite mirror. "Such destructive extravagance!" reasoned his wife in a low tone. "All in its joy at having gained such a lovely creature, such a little Venus, such a damned enchanting, bewitching, engrossing, captivating little Venus," said Mantalini. "See what a situation you have placed me in," urged Madame. "No harm will come, no harm shall come to its own darling," rejoined Mr. Mantalini. "It is all over. There will be nothing the matter. Money shall be got in, and if it don't come in fast enough, old Nickleby shall stump up again or have his jugular separated, and if he dares to hurt the little—" "Hush!" interposed Madame. "Don't you see?"
Mr. Mantalini, who in his eagerness to make up matters with his wife had overlooked, or feigned to overlook, Miss Nickleby hitherto, took the hint and laying his finger on his lip, sunk his voice still lower. There was then a great deal of whispering, during which Madame Mantalini appeared to make reference more than once to certain debts incurred by Mr. Mantalini previous to her coverture, and also to an unexpected outlay of money in payment of the aforesaid debts, and furthermore to certain agreeable weaknesses on that gentleman's part, such as gaming, wasting, idling, and a tendency to horseflesh, each of which matters of accusation Mr. Mantalini disposed of, by one kiss or more, as its relative importance demanded. The upshot of it all was that Madame Mantalini was in raptures with him, and they went upstairs to breakfast. Kate busied herself in what she had to do, and was silently arranging the various articles of decoration in the best taste she could display, when she started to hear a strange man's voice in the room, and started again, to observe, on looking round, that a white hat and a red neckerchief and a broad round face and a large head and part of a green coat were in the room too. "Don't alarm yourself, miss," said the proprietor of these appearances. "I say, this here's the manty-making concern, an't it?" "Yes," rejoined Kate, greatly astonished. "What did you want?" The stranger answered not, but, first looking back, as though to beckon some unseen person outside, came very deliberately into the room, and was closely followed by a little man in brown, very much the worse for wear, who brought with him a mingled fumigation of stale tobacco and fresh onions. The clothes of this gentleman were much bespeckled with flue, and his shoes, stockings, and nether garments, from his heels to the waist-buttons of his coat inclusive, were profusely embroidered with splashes of mud, caught a fortnight previously, before the settling in of the fine weather. Kate's very natural impression was that these engaging individuals had called with the view of possessing themselves, unlawfully, of any portable articles that chanced to strike their fancy. She did not attempt to disguise her apprehensions, and made a move towards the door. "Wait a minute," said the man in the green coat, closing it softly and standing with his back against it. "This is an unpleasant business. Where's your governor?" "My what, did you say?" asked Kate, trembling, for she thought governor might be slang for watch or money. "Mr. Mantalini," said the man. "What's come on him? Is he at home?" "He is above stairs, I believe," replied Kate, a little reassured by this inquiry. "Do you want him?" "No," replied the visitor. "I don't exactly want him if it's made a favour on. You can just give him that 'ere card and tell him if he wants to speak to me and save trouble, here I am. That's all." With these words, the stranger put a thick square card into Kate's hand, and, turning to his friend, remarked with an easy air that the rooms was a good high pitch, to which the friend assented, adding by way of illustration that there was lots of room for a little boy to grow up a man in either on 'em, without much fear of his ever bringing his head into contact with the ceiling. After ringing the bell which would summon Madame Mantalini, Kate glanced at the card and saw that it displayed the name of Scaley, together with some other information to which she had not had time to refer when her attention was attracted by Mr. Scaley himself, who, walking up to one of the cheval glasses, gave it a hard poke in the centre with his stick, as coolly as if it had been made of cast iron. "Good plate this year, Tix," said Mr. Scaley to his friend. "Ah!" rejoined Mr. Tix, placing the marks of his four fingers and a duplicate impression of his thumb on a piece of sky-blue silk. "And this here article warn't made for nothing, mind you." From the silk, Mr. Tix transferred his admiration to some elegant articles of wearing apparel, while Mr. Scaley adjusted his neckcloth, at leisure, before the glass, and afterwards, aided by its reflection, proceeded to the minute consideration of a pimple on his chin, in which absorbing occupation he was yet engaged when Madame Mantalini, entering the room, uttered an exclamation of surprise which roused him. "Oh, is this the missus?" inquired Scaley. "It is Madame Mantalini," said Kate. "Then," said Mr. Scaley, producing a small document from his pocket and unfolding it very slowly.
"This is a writ of execution, and if it's not convenient to settle, we'll go over the house at once, please, and take the inventory."
Poor Madame Mantalini wrung her hands for grief and rung the bell for her husband, which done she fell into a chair and a fainting fit simultaneously. The professional gentlemen, however, were not at all discomposed by this event, for Mr. Scaley, leaning upon a stand on which a handsome dress was displayed, so that his shoulders appeared above it in nearly the same manner as the shoulders of the lady for whom it was designed would have done if she had had it on, pushed his hat on one side and scratched his head with perfect unconcern, while his friend Mr. Tix, taking that opportunity for a general survey of the apartment preparatory to entering on business, stood with his inventory book under his arm and his hat in his hand, mentally occupied in putting a price upon every object within his range of vision. Such was the posture of affairs when Mr. Mantalini hurried in, and as that distinguished specimen had had a pretty extensive intercourse with Mr. Scaley's fraternity in his bachelor days, and was, besides, very far from being taken by surprise on the present agitating occasion, he merely shrugged his shoulders, thrust his hands down to the bottom of his pockets, elevated his eyebrows, whistled a bar or two, swore an oath or two, and, sitting astride upon a chair, put the best face upon the matter with great composure and decency. "What's the damned total?" was the first question he asked. £1,527 4 and ninepence halfpenny, replied Mr. Scaley, without moving a limb. "The halfpenny be damned," said Mr. Mantalini impatiently. "By all means, if you wish it," retorted Mr. Scaley. "And the ninepence?" "It don't matter to us if the £1,527 went along with it, that I know on," observed Mr. Tix. "Not a button," said Scaley. "Well," said the same gentleman after a pause, "what's to be done? Anything? Is it only a small crack or a out-and-out smash? A break-up of the constitution, is it? Very good. Then, Mr. Tom Tix, Esquire, you must inform your angel wife and lovely family as you won't sleep at home for 3 nights to come, along of being in possession here. What's the good of the lady a fretting herself?" continued Mr. Scaley, as Madame Mantalini sobbed. "A good half of what's here isn't paid for, I dessay. And what a consolation oughtn't that to be to her feelings?" With these remarks, combining great pleasantry with sound moral encouragement under difficulties, Mr. Scaley proceeded to take the inventory, in which delicate task he was materially assisted by the uncommon tact and experience of Mr. Tix, the broker. "My cup of happiness's sweetener," said Mantalini, approaching his wife with a penitent air, "will you listen to me for 2 minutes?"
"Oh, don't speak to me," replied his wife, sobbing. "You have ruined me, and that's enough." Mr. Mantalini, who had doubtless well considered his part, no sooner heard these words pronounced in a tone of grief and severity than he recoiled several paces, assumed an expression of consuming mental agony, rushed headlong from the room, and was soon afterwards heard to slam the door of an upstairs dressing-room with great violence. "Miss Nickleby,"
cried Madame Mantalini, when this sound met her ear,
"make haste! For heaven's sake, he will destroy himself. I spoke unkindly to him, and he cannot bear it from me. Alfred, my darling, Alfred!"
With such exclamations she hurried upstairs, followed by Kate, who, although she did not quite participate in the fond wife's apprehensions, was a little flurried nevertheless. The dressing-room door being hastily flung open, Mr. Mantalini was disclosed to view, with his shirt-collar symmetrically thrown back, putting a fine edge to a breakfast knife by means of his razor-strop.
"Ah!"
cried Mr. Mantalini. "Interrupted!" And whisk went the breakfast knife into Mr. Mantalini's dressing-gown pocket, while Mr. Mantalini's eyes rolled wildly and his hair, floating in wild disorder, mingled with his whiskers.
"Alfred!"
cried his wife, flinging her arms about him.
"I didn't mean to say it. I didn't mean to say it."
"Ruined!" cried Mr. Mantalini. "Have I brought ruin upon the best and purest creature that ever blessed a dead nation, vagabond? Damn it, let me go!" At this crisis of his ravings, Mr. Mantalini made a pluck at the breakfast knife, and being restrained by his wife's grasp, attempted to dash his head against the wall, taking very good care to be at least 6 feet from it. "Compose yourself, my own angel," said madam. "It was nobody's fault. It was mine as much as yours. We shall do very well yet. Come, Alfred, come." Mr. Mantalini did not think proper to come to all at once, but, after calling several times for poison and requesting some lady or gentleman to blow his brains out, gentler feelings came upon him, and he wept pathetically. In this softened frame of mind he did not oppose the capture of the knife, which, to tell the truth, he was rather glad to be rid of, as an inconvenient and dangerous article for a skirt pocket, and finally he suffered himself to be led away by his affectionate partner. After a delay of 2 or 3 hours, the young ladies were informed that their services would be dispensed with until further notice, and at the expiration of 2 days the name of Mantalini appeared in the list of bankrupts. Miss Nickleby received an intimation per post on the same morning that the business would be, in future, carried on under the name of Miss Nagg, and that her assistance would no longer be required. A piece of intelligence with which Mrs. Nickleby was no sooner made acquainted than that good lady declared she had expected it all along, and cited divers unknown occasions on which she had prophesied to that precise effect.
"And I say again," remarked Mrs. Nickleby,
who it is scarcely necessary to observe had never said so before,
"I say again that a milliner's and dressmaker's is the very last description of business, Kate, that you should have thought of attaching yourself to. I don't make it a reproach to you, my love, but still I will say that if you had consulted your own mother—"
"Well, well, mamma," said Kate mildly, "what would you recommend now?"
"Recommend?" cried Mrs. Nickleby. "Isn't it obvious, my dear, that of all occupations in this world for a young lady situated as you are, that of companion to some amiable lady is the very thing for which your education and manners and personal appearance and everything else exactly qualify you? Did you never hear your poor dear papa speak of the young lady who was the daughter of the old lady who boarded in the same house that he boarded in once when he was a bachelor? What was her name again now? I know it began with a B and ended with G. But whether it was Waters or no, it couldn't have been that either. But whatever her name was, don't you know that that young lady went as companion to a married lady who died soon afterwards, and that she married the husband and had one of the finest little boys that the medical man had ever seen, all within 18 months?
Kate knew perfectly well that this torrent of favourable recollection was occasioned by some opening, real or imaginary, which her mother had discovered in the companionship walk of life. She therefore waited very patiently until all reminiscences and anecdotes, bearing or not bearing upon the subject, had been exhausted, and at last ventured to inquire what discovery had been made. The truth then came out. Mrs. Nickleby had, that morning, had a yesterday's newspaper of the very first respectability from the public house where the porter came from, and in this yesterday's newspaper was an advertisement, couched in the purest and most grammatical English, announcing that a married lady was in want of a genteel young person as companion, and that the married lady's name and address were to be known on application at a certain library at the west end of the town therein mentioned.
"And I say," exclaimed Mrs. Nickleby, laying the paper down in triumph, "that if your uncle don't object, it's well worth the trial."
Kate was too sick at heart, after the rough jostling she had already had with the world, and really cared too little at the moment what fate was reserved for her, to make any objection. Mr. Ralph Nickleby offered none, but, on the contrary, highly approved of the suggestion, neither did he express any great surprise at Madame Mantalini's sudden failure. Indeed, it would have been strange if he had, inasmuch as it had been procured and brought about chiefly by himself. So the name and address were obtained without loss of time, and Miss Nickleby and her mamma went off in quest of Mrs. Wititterly of Cadogan Place, Sloane Street, that same forenoon. Cadogan Place is the one slight bond that joins two great extremes. It is the connecting link between the aristocratic pavements of Belgrave Square and the barbarism of Chelsea. It is in Sloane Street, but not of it. The people in Cadogan Place look down upon Sloane Street and think Brompton low. They affect fashion, too, and wonder where the New Road is. Not that they claim to be on precisely the same footing as the high folks of Belgrave Square and Grosvenor Place, but that they stand, with reference to them, rather in the light of those illegitimate children of the great who are content to boast of their connections, although their connections disavow them. Wearing as much as they can of the airs and semblances of loftiest rank, the people of Cadogan Place have the realities of middle station. It is the conductor which communicates to the inhabitants of regions beyond its limit the shock of pride of birth and rank, which it is not within itself, but derives from a fountain-head beyond. Or, like the ligament which unites the Siamese twins, it contains something of the life and essence of two distinct bodies, and yet belongs to neither. Upon this doubtful ground lived Mrs. Wititterly, and at Mrs. Wititterly's door Kate Nickleby knocked with trembling hand. The door was opened by a big footman with his head floured, or chalked, or painted in some way. It didn't look genuine powder. And the big footman, receiving the card of introduction, gave it to a little page, so little indeed that his body would not hold, in ordinary array, the number of small buttons which are indispensable to a page's costume, and they were consequently obliged to be stuck on 4 abreast. This young gentleman took the card upstairs on a salver, and pending his return, Kate and her mother were shown into a dining-room of rather dirty and shabby aspect, and so comfortably arranged as to be adapted to almost any purpose rather than eating and drinking. Now, in the ordinary course of things, and according to all authentic descriptions of high life as set forth in books, Mrs. Wititterly ought to have been in her boudoir. But whether it was that Mr. Wititterly was at that moment shaving himself in the boudoir, or what not, certain it is that Mrs. Wititterly gave audience in the drawing-room, where was everything proper and necessary, including curtains and furniture coverings of a roseate hue, to shed a delicate bloom on Mrs. Wititterly's complexion, and a little dog to snap at strangers' legs for Mrs. Wititterly's amusement, and the aforementioned page to hand chocolate for Mrs. Wititterly's refreshment. The lady had an air of sweet insipidity and a face of engaging paleness. There was a faded look about her, and about the furniture, and about the house. She was reclining on a sofa in such a very unstudied attitude that she might have been taken for an actress all ready for the first scene in a ballet and only waiting for the drop curtain to go up. "Place chairs." The page placed them. "Leave the room, Alphonse." The page left it. But if ever an Alphonse carried plain Bill in his face and figure, that page was the boy. "I have ventured to call, ma'am," said Kate after a few seconds of awkward silence, "from having seen your advertisement." "Yes," replied Mrs. Wititterly. "One of my people put it in the paper. Yes." "I thought perhaps," said Kate modestly, "that if you had not already made a final choice, you would forgive my troubling you with an application." "Yes," drawled Mrs. Wititterly again. "If you have already made a selection—" "Oh, dear no," interrupted the lady. "I am not so easily suited. I really don't know what to say. You have never been a companion before, have you?" Mrs. Nickleby, who had been eagerly watching her opportunity, came dexterously in before Kate could reply. "Not to any stranger, ma'am," said the good lady, "but she has been a companion to me for some years. I am her mother, ma'am." "Oh," said Mrs. Wititterly, "I apprehend you." "I assure you, ma'am," said Mrs. Nickleby, "that I very little thought at one time that it would be necessary for my daughter to go out into the world at all, for her poor dear papa was an independent gentleman, and would have been at this moment if he had but listened in time to my constant entreaties, and—" "Dear mamma," said Kate in a low voice. "My dear Kate, if you will allow me to speak,"
said Mrs. Nickleby, "I shall take the liberty of explaining to this lady. I think it is almost unnecessary, mamma."
And notwithstanding all the frowns and winks with which Mrs. Nickleby intimated that she was going to say something which would clench the business at once, Kate maintained her point by an expressive look, and for once Mrs. Nickleby was stopped upon the very brink of an oration.
"What are your accomplishments?"
asked Mrs. Wititterly, with her eyes shut. Kate blushed as she mentioned her principal acquirements, and Mrs. Nickleby checked them all off, one by one, on her fingers, having calculated the number before she came out. Luckily the two calculations agreed, so Mrs. Nickleby had no excuse for talking.
"You are a good temper?"
asked Mrs. Wititterly, opening her eyes for an instant and shutting them again.
"I hope so,"
rejoined Kate.
"And have a highly respectable reference for everything, have you?"
Kate replied that she had, and laid her uncle's card upon the table.
"Have the goodness to draw your chair a little nearer and let me look at you," said Mrs. Wititterly. "I am so very near-sighted that I can't quite discern your features."
Kate complied, though not without some embarrassment, with this request, and Mrs. Wititterly took a languid survey of her countenance which lasted some 2 or 3 minutes.
"I like your appearance,"
said that lady, ringing a little bell.
"Alphonse, request your master to come here."
The page disappeared on this errand, and after a short interval, during which not a word was spoken on either side, opened the door for an important gentleman of about 38, of rather plebeian countenance, and with a very light head of hair, who leant over Mrs. Wititterly for a little time and conversed with her in whispers. "Oh," he said, turning round. "Yes, this is a most important matter. Mrs. Wititterly is of a very excitable nature, very delicate, very fragile, a hothouse plant, an exotic."
"Oh, Henry, my dear,"
interposed Mrs. Wititterly.
"You are, my love.
You know you are. One breath," said Mr. W., blowing an imaginary feather away. "Tho! You're gone." The lady sighed.
"Your soul is too large for your body," said Mr. Wititterly. "Your intellect wears you out. All the medical men say so. You know that there is not a physician who is not proud of being called in to you. What is their unanimous declaration?"
"My dear doctor," said I to Sir Tumley Snuffim in this very room the very last time he came, "my dear doctor, what is my wife's complaint? Tell me all. I can bear it. Is it nerves?" "My dear fellow," he said, "be proud of that woman. Make much of her. She is an ornament to the fashionable world and to you. Her complaint is soul. It swells, expands, dilates, the blood fires, the pulse quickens, the excitement increases. Poof!" Here Mr. Wititterly, who in the ardour of his description had flourished his right hand to within something less than an inch of Mrs. Nickleby's bonnet, drew it hastily back again and blew his nose as fiercely as if it had been done by some violent machinery.
"You make me out worse than I am, Henry,"
said Mrs. Wititterly with a faint smile. "I do not, Julia, I do not," said Mr. W. "The society in which you move, necessarily move, from your station, connexion, and endowment, is one vortex and whirlpool of the most frightful excitement. Bless my heart and body, can I ever forget the night you danced with the baronet's nephew at the election ball at Exeter? It was tremendous."
"I always suffer for these triumphs afterwards,"
said Mrs. Wititterly. "And for that very reason," rejoined her husband, "you must have a companion in whom there is great gentleness, great sweetness, excessive sympathy, and perfect repose." Here both Mr. and Mrs. Wititterly, who had talked rather at the Nicklebys than to each other, left off speaking and looked at their two hearers with an expression of countenance which seemed to say, "What do you think of all this?" "Mrs. Wititterly," said her husband, addressing himself to Mrs. Nickleby, "is sought after and courted by glittering crowds and brilliant circles. She is excited by the opera, the drama, the fine arts, the
nobility, my love,"
interposed Mrs. Wititterly. "The nobility, of course," said Mr. Wititterly. "And the military. She forms and expresses an immense variety of opinions on an immense variety of subjects. If some people in public life were acquainted with Mrs. Wititterly's real opinion of them, they would not hold their heads, perhaps, quite as high as they do."
"Hush, Henry," said the lady. "This is scarcely fair."
"I mention no names, Julia," replied Mr. Wititterly, "and nobody is injured. I merely mention the circumstance to show that you are no ordinary person, that there is a constant friction perpetually going on between your mind and your body, and that you must be soothed and tended. Now, let me hear, dispassionately and calmly, what are this young lady's qualifications for the office?" In obedience to this request, the qualifications were all gone through again, with the addition of many interruptions and cross-questionings from Mr. Wititterly. It was finally arranged that inquiries should be made and a decisive answer addressed to Miss Nickleby under cover of her uncle within 2 days. These conditions agreed upon, the page showed them down as far as the staircase window, and the big footman, relieving guard at that point, piloted them in perfect safety to the street door.
"They are very distinguished people, evidently," said Mrs. Nickleby as she took her daughter's arm. "What a superior person Mrs. Wititterly is!"
"Do you think so, mamma?" was all Kate's reply.
"Why, who can help thinking so, Kate, my love?" rejoined her mother. "She is pale, though, and looks much exhausted. I hope she may not be wearing herself out, but I am very much afraid." These considerations led the deep-sighted lady into a calculation of the probable duration of Mrs. Wititterly's life and the chances of the disconsolate widower bestowing his hand on her daughter. Before reaching home she had freed Mrs. Wititterly's soul from all bodily restraint, married Kate with great splendour at St. George's, Hanover Square, and only left undecided the minor question whether a splendid French-polished mahogany bedstead should be erected for herself in the 2-pair back of the house in Cadogan Place, or in the 3-pair front, between which apartments she could not quite balance the advantages, and therefore adjusted the question at last by determining to leave it to the decision of her son-in-law. The inquiries were made. The answer, not to Kate's very great joy, was favourable, and at the expiration of a week she betook herself with all her movables and valuables to Mrs. Wititterly's mansion, where for the present we will leave her. Chapter 21